Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. Well, I can't guarantee that the Amazon man won't come to the door, so there's always those moments of just give me a second, I need to go and deal with that. So.
Oh my gosh.
It does happen. Okay, here we are. Fantastic. I nearly said fan-dabby-dozy, but that's only something that UK people of a certain age would understand, so I won't. But so, Joe, it is great to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Guy. Good to be here.
And, Joe, I say this every episode. I do know who you are. And it would be great, though, just for people that don't, just to get a sense of the space that you inhabit.
So I'm a psychometrician. Have you ever met one before?
I think that's why you're here.
When my youngest was in grade school, he asked me one day, Dad, what do you do? And I said, I'm a psychometrician. And he said, okay. He started to walk off. I said, why are you asking? He says, well, today in school, we're going to talk about what our moms and dads do. So I'm going to tell them. And I said, good luck. So he went off to school. I went off to work that night. I came home. I said, how'd it go at school? He said, good. Did you tell him what I do? He says, yeah, but I could only remember the first part, the psycho. Anyway.
Boom, boom. He's here all week, kids.
But a psychometrician is a psychologist that measures things. And I have spent my career mostly measuring leadership and interpersonal skills of people, and really trying to help people to understand their skills and their strengths. The weird thing about humans is we've found that the worst person at identifying their strengths and weaknesses is the person themselves. Everyone else knows, but we're the last to kind of realize that we're really good at something or really bad at something. And so we think that helping people understand how other people see them is a really valuable asset. So that's what we do.
I think it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. Have I got that right? The people maybe with the potentially at one end with the least capability of self-reflection often have the highest sense of themselves. I don't know if I've paraphrased that dramatically and ruined it, but I think that's the one.
Yeah, it's really just we're built wrong, right? I mean, we see others, but we just don't see ourselves. But other people see us, and what's interesting about it is there's a fair amount of consistency about what people see. I mean, what we do is get a group of peers, direct reports, and others to sort of measure, your effectiveness on a set of dimensions. And there's a fair level of consistency between them. The only person that's kind of off is you.
So what is it that stops the person who we're talking about seeing themselves with a level of clarity? Or maybe the question is, what does it take to be able to say, listen, I can't see myself completely as others see me, but I know I'm in the right space? So,
I mean, if you just look at one little skill or attribute that would help most people, it's asking for feedback. And so if we look at the people who are the worst, they're just never ask for feedback, don't want to hear it, talk to the hand, those people, if you look at their effectiveness as a leader, they're at the 10th percentile. And if you look at the other end, the people that are great at asking for feedback, just how am I doing? Is this okay? Did I do a good job? Their leadership effectiveness is at the 90th percentile. So that's not very hard to do. But most people, when they're new on a job and they're young, they tend to ask occasionally. But as you age and as you move up in terms of hierarchy and positions, you ask less often. And so we've just come out with a new program called Coachability, and this whole idea that people who ask for feedback, and again, there's a little bit about how you ask, because if you say, "How am I doing?" what you'll hear is "Great." But if you ask two questions, and these are the two that work, if you say, what did I do that was helpful that I ought to do again? What did I do that was useful? And that's the first question. And then if you say, gee, if I could change something, if I could do something better, what would you recommend I do to improve? Just those two questions. You'll get some pretty good feedback. And typically people are pretty accurate at telling you what you did well and what you didn't do well. And they're pretty nice about it too, most of the time. And not everybody, but most of the time that works. That's just a great habit to develop.
I've been fascinated by this, getting the honest feedback when this whole concept of speaking truth to power and people's relationship with saying the things that maybe don't get said. So you've got the anonymity potentially of an online 360 psychometric, but very often when executives are being put through that process, it's often a coach or a team coach that's having the one-to-one interviews with people. So that person potentially can contract with people, or the system says it's anonymous, but for the individual to ask. So I want to offer you, just because I know who I'm in front of, and I'd really like you to kind of run it through your frame of reference. I often notice if you ask the glib question, how am I doing? Or where could I do better? It's a little bit like going into a shop and they say, can I help you? You go, oh, no, thanks. But how much is that television? There's a little set of automatic responses. If somebody says, where am I invaluable? Or they ask the question, where do I self-sabotage? What I've noticed is that the strength of those two questions mean that people find it easier to dial down their response and go, well, you don't self-sabotage, but where you probably don't help yourself, it's a lot easier to come down than it is to go up. Yeah. And I just wonder if that resonates with you, because it resonates with me.
It's great. Two great questions. I mean, the mistake is that, you just say, how am I doing? And people go, great. And people say, that feedback thing doesn't work. But, that question of where am I invaluable? It's like, that's a great question, right? Because it really causes people to go, well, most of the time you're not. But coming up with that question itself is really invaluable.
I like that, yeah. And I think there is just something about offering that I'm looking for something real, and I'm actually going to ask you two questions that I think are quite difficult to answer, because you'll have to offer me things that are really definitive, and they'd have to be spot on. So it's a testing, but it's a kind of, as you say, it's going beyond the reflex response, I think. So I like your approach as well. I just offer you mine in the sense of what we're doing.
It's beautiful, and we wrote this article on listening, and we in the Harvard Business Review, and he said, which is the right analogy for a good listener? Is it a sponge or a trampoline? Most people go, it's a sponge. You just, and we go, no, it's not. It's a trampoline. It is that skill of asking good questions. That really is a key to being a great listener, right?
In the article that I saw, which was around feedback, I'd love you to bring some of that to life, because you may ask the question. But there was something in there around just the effect of, depending on which position you come at the questioning from, what it then starts to mean. And I'd just like to kind of just get your general, it's not a word for word on the article, but just bring that to life a little bit, because I read a lot of stuff, as you can imagine, as I'm sure you do. So for it to resonate with me, it was quite powerful.
Maybe to start with, there's a meta study, which is a study of studies. It's like where researchers go and look at all the studies on feedback. And so this meta study by Kruger and Denisi, what they found is that 38% of the time, when you are asking or for feedback, or when you're getting feedback, you have negative side effects. In other words, it goes wrong 38% of the time. And you go, what do you do and keep doing that just blows up in your face 38% of the time? I mean, that is terrible. And so that being said, this whole issue of feedback is fraught with all kinds of crazy stuff, right? So there's this thing called the amygdala hijack, right? That's where your crazy part of the brain that says somebody's attacking me takes over, and it pumps adrenaline into your lungs. And most of us can think about a feedback experience where we've done that, where we went in and we felt like we were being attacked, and we noticed that our pulse went up. And what's interesting when that happens is that in order for you to fight or flight, the blood drains out of the brain and down into your arms and your lungs, right, where you need it, right, because you're going to run away, but you're not thinking very clearly, right? So,
and when it says 38%, it goes wrong. What's it offering as wrong?
What you intended isn't what you got, right? You were trying to help and it hurt. You were trying to, you were really trying to, be useful, and it's like the person interpreted completely different, right? Or, they didn't believe the it's like you said, you're doing this, and they, no, I'm not. They start to argue with you. So it just didn't work. So, we designed a self-assessment where we looked at your preference for asking positive or negative, asking or giving positive and negative feedback. So you have your preference to ask for and your preference to give. And so the surprising statistic from this self-assessment, and this is about 10,000 people, right? So this is across the globe. We found that 63% of the people that filled out that survey had a stronger preference to give negative feedback than positive feedback, right? So 63% want to give you negative feedback. Only 44% want to give positive feedback, right? And then the other interesting statistic is that 37% of the and these are mostly managers that we studied, tend to avoid giving positive feedback. So 63% they prefer to give negative feedback, and 37% avoid giving positive feedback. And okay, that's crazy. Now, to kind of study this, we ask people the question, how would you rate yourself at giving straightforward feedback, honest feedback? And what we found is the people that avoided giving positive feedback and preferred giving negative feedback, 72% of them felt that they were really good at giving honest feedback, right? And those that preferred giving positive feedback but avoided giving negative feedback, only 40% said they were good at it. So the interesting thing is that people that give negative feedback think they're doing a good job, right? And people that tend to give positive feedback say, I'm not very great. I'm not brilliant at it, right? So they think it's their job to tell people what's wrong, right? And so what we then did is we gathered this 360 feedback where others rate you on the same question, gives honest feedback in a helpful way. And what we found in this case was that those that gave negative and avoided positive, okay, just the tendency to give negative and avoiding the positive, they were rated only at the 36th percentile, and those that gave positive and avoided negative were rated at the 53rd percentile. Significantly different, better and worse. So, those people that, and so we've found a lot of managers think it's their job to tell people what's wrong, to correct people, to make sure that nobody messes the place up, right? And so they have a tendency to give a lot more negative feedback than positive feedback. And, if you think about this whole idea of, are you giving honest feedback? And if you say, well, what is honest feedback? Well, I would say if you do 90% of your work correctly and 10% of your work, where it's not great or it needs, to do, you need to do better. Honest feedback would be to give somebody 90% positive feedback and 10% corrective, right? That would be honest. And yet I don't think people believe that. I think there's a philosophy or belief that if I give you too much positive feedback, you'll either take advantage of me, right? That will be a signal that I'm weak and I'm not the boss or something like that. Or that when I need to give you negative feedback, you won't listen to it. So there's this fear about, you can't, give people too much positive feedback. It's a problem. And so there's a tendency to give more negative than positive. Now, the fun little fact of this is this John Gottman study. John is a marriage researcher. So John has these experiments where he sits couples down and he just has them talk to each other. And then his graduate students, they count the number of positive and the number of negative interactions the couple has, right, over some period of time. And then he does that and gets their names, and then he studies them. He goes, 5 years in the future and 10 years in the future. And what he finds is that if you have a tendency to give more negative than positive, the probability is you're going to get divorced. It goes way up. But if you had this 5-to-1, which that you've heard that ratio before, and I don't think it's 5-to-1. It's more positive than negative. But people that tended to be, give 5 negative to 1, or 5 positive to 1 negative, they tended to stay married. So that I think that is a fascinating, and I don't think you need to count it up or anything like that. But this idea that in relationships, you're going to try to say more positive and try to give people more positive feedback than negative feedback. That ought to be the goal of most managers and most people and in most relationships. So
I'm fascinated by this, and I've heard this 5-to-1 before, and I've noticed that when that's trained in as 5-to-1, one of the things that can happen, probably more often than not, people leave the room trying to praise 5 times more than they give some sort of, let's say, calibrating, let's put it like that, feedback.
Right.
And it can then turn into, and I don't know if the phrase translates to the US, but the happy clappy club, where we've got everybody praising everybody for everything because they heard 5 to 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things I note is that if I am working with a team, senior team, doesn't matter, or some of my associates are delivering more that management training at the bottom. When you say to anybody, if I just tapped you on the shoulder and said, hey, can I give you some feedback? Instinctively, what do you think is going to happen next? And 99% of the time, people will go, I take a deep breath, think, oh my God. And I presume it's going to be something, negative to some degree or not. And I offer, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, I offer this idea around, well, really the role of somebody who's in a leadership position, senior management position, whatever the vocabulary is there, is to create an environment or a relationship with you or as a team or as an organization where the word feedback doesn't mean that you know whether or not it's going to be positive or negative. Because actually, and I think this is where I'm picking up on your point, it's not necessarily about 5 to 1. Because if it's 5 to 1 and I said, can you give us some feedback? Then you're mostly going to go, oh, this is going to be great. Which I don't think is, again, maybe less than helpful. But actually, I think what it is what's going to happen next? Well, I don't know, because it's balanced. It's balanced. And that might mean I may have a run of being held to account for a few things. But on balance, when I look at the month, when I look at the quarter, when I look at the year, if I really think about it, on balance, I get, hey, great stuff, reinforce it, hey, subtle calibrations, and hey, you might want to think about it because I don't think that's working. So this idea of the word feedback, when I look at an organization or a team and as an individual, are you afraid to use the word? Or if you're not, what happens to your people when they hear you use it? And when you move to a space where when the word is utilized, people don't really have a flinch response to it because actually they don't know what it's going to be, that then tells me, generally speaking, they're not afraid of it, which means it's relatively balanced. I don't know how that resonates with you, Joe.
I think you've got a good approach there. And I looked, we've all had probably in our university experience some professor that never gave an A, right? And, you avoided that person like the plague, right? And we find there's managers out there, that they don't want to give the ranch away, right? They're afraid. They think it's their job to be the critic. And so we identified, what's the effect of having one of these managers that just, felt like, praise, they really, they felt it was their job to sort of point out what was wrong. And they never gave A's, right? They just tried to avoid it. And inevitably, the result is the effectiveness of the people that they manage went way down. Now, it's completely the opposite of what they want, right? Because you think they have high standards. Because of their high standards, wouldn't the performance go up? But it doesn't. And no problem. Nobody wants to work for these people because it's just a miserable existence, right? But the performance of the people didn't increase. Their effect, there was a significant difference. Those that worked for the critics were rated by others, not the manager themselves. We know the manager is going to rate them low, but the people that worked for them other than the manager rated them significantly lower. It is hard to work for a critic, and people don't want to do it. And I mean, if you're a hard grader, I mean, you think I'm getting more performance out of people. Guess what? You're getting lower performance out of people because nobody wants to do that. And life's too short, right?
What do you see as potentially the barriers to people that have got to a certain level and they have certain indicators that say, I must be doing it the right way because look where I've got to. I have all the indicators that tell me maybe I'm not perfect, but I'm more right than I am wrong. So when you come at me and you say things like, my feedback may not be as balanced, or this negative perspective that I have actually doesn't, I know that when I go into that, give that feedback or give people a kick up the arse or whatever their internal dialogue is, I know it sets them all scurrying away, and I know I get better results. What's the process that you go through to shift somebody? Because when you're 18, you'll almost believe anything. And if they see you or me first, right, they're going to react to that because it's the first bit of feedback training they've had. So they go, take that on board. But when you get to a certain age, it takes, what does it take to shift somebody into that new line of thinking?
What's fascinating, I just did some research on humility versus arrogance. And the way we measured humility and arrogance was basically to look at how you rated yourself and how other people rated you, right? On some specific items. And we started with an item that actually asked, is this person arrogant, or do they listen and really respond? Well, he said, is this person humble, and do they respond and listen to the feedback from others? And if the person themselves rated that item above average, as we looked at the average for how self people did it, if they rated themselves above average and other people rated them below average, that's arrogant, right? And if you rated yourself below average and other people rated you above average, that was humble. So, in Christendom, the philosophy is the humble shall inherit the earth. And my gosh, that's true. Because when we looked at, and we had this 5-point scale of arrogance, and we looked at a person that had a 1, kind of a -1 out of 5, which is like, yeah, they're a little arrogant. And what we saw is a significant shift in the overall perceived effectiveness. And there's a huge, this arrogance. And the more I look at this, the more I come to believe that we all need to kind of say to ourselves, I am just not as good as I think I am. I may think, oh, I really nailed it, and I know somebody out there hated it, and I mean, this sounds like a depressing life, but constantly saying to yourself, I could do better. Somebody's not going to like this. I need to try harder. This, I'm not as good. And I'm in a position where, and I know, Guy, you are too, people go around and they say, oh, you're wonderful. You're such a blah, blah, blah. And you just have to say, BS. That is a crock of crap. I'm not that good. And because you're not, I mean, and as soon as you start thinking you are, you're gonna be in trouble, or a politician. I'm not sure which, but that. But I think you have to ground yourself, and the best way to ground yourself is to say, I'm never as good as I think I am, and other people are not going to love it, and maybe some will, but some won't. And in order to be effective, I've got to be better. I've got to do more. And that's just, maybe that's depressing. I don't know. Is it depressing?
Well, I think, I've done martial arts all of my life, really, since I was about 13, 14. And one of the things that you learn quite quickly is that humility is the only thing that's going to help you get better. Because nobody that's better than you wants to train with somebody that is arrogant. They won't teach you. They won't show you. They'll tie you up in knots and leave you to think about it. But those are the people that if you don't have humility, you will leave because you're just not going to get better. You're going to blame everybody else. And actually, it's not about submissiveness. It's about just recognizing that actually, even if you're really, really good, so there are people, so I'm very highly qualified in one particular martial art. And I, even the other day, was thinking, I just can't, I really need to practice on that. I haven't really got the hang of it as well as I'd like to. Well, I know that 90% of the population would look at me doing it and go, wow. But that's like me looking at a golfer and going, oh my God, look at Tiger Woods, he's amazing. But I'm pretty sure he'll be out there next Monday practicing on that thing that he thinks he needs to improve on. So there's something here about, yes, humility, but humility is also craft, I think, in the leadership space. And craft is a big difference between being competent and being a master of your craft. Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing as I translate it into my vocabulary is you can technically understand something, you can become technically competent at applying it, feedback, the process. Do you have a model? What do you follow? So yeah, you're technically doing it correctly. But then to be maybe not a master of your craft, but to be working towards that, that's where the humility piece comes in, that recognition of, I can probably do this quite well most of the time, but it's my situational sensing, it's my emotional intelligence, it's my recognizing when actually I'm really only giving feedback for me because I'm really annoyed rather than, and all these other little things that may exist. So maybe that's what it is, that when you're 18, you're just happy to learn the model and good lord, right, I've got a way of doing it. But as you mature, you know what to do, but it's your actual capacity to do it with more senior people who have got more invested or have whatever it might be. And that's where it takes the humility to go, yeah, I'm always working. I could have said that differently. I probably missed that trick. And it is that self-reflection. Have I kind of translated that in properly, Joe?
Absolutely, Guy. I mean, it is just kind of being aware that I mean, if you believe you're good press, it's a problem. But I mean, I think, this idea of constantly sort of saying to yourself, other people may not see me as competent as I try to be. And yeah. And as I'm saying this, I'm sort of saying, boy, I'm not doing a great job here on this webinar, this podcast.
I think you are.
I wish I could be more brilliant.
And maybe that's what it is, humble, and this word humble, humility, but there also is something about just that recognition that if you're always thinking about how you can improve, it's okay to acknowledge that you're good at something. Yeah. It doesn't have to be that false humility of I'm terrible at it. No, it's okay to say, no, I am good at it. I do, but I'm good at it because I work at it. I'm good at it because I reflect. I ask those questions, of myself, or I ask others to review me. I check in. So yes, thank you for the acknowledgement that I'm skilled at my craft, but it comes at a price, which is eternal vigilance and the working at it. And maybe there's a humility in the never stopping learning.
I remember when I wrote my first book, and I'd write a chapter and then I'd give it to this editor, and he'd go through it, give it back to me, and I mean, he just ripped it to shreds. I mean, and it made me mad because I was kind of embarrassed, but it wasn't until I sort of said to myself, okay, who's a better writer, me or him? Well, he is a better writer. I'm not a great writer. Well, okay, you have two choices. Choice one is to kind of keep getting mad when people edit you, or choice two is to sort of say, thank you very much. I really love being edited. and
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
You just kind of go, yeah. I mean, most people on the earth are better writers than I am. So you know what? That's okay. Because 13 books later, I think it was a good decision to let people edit me.
Well, I've only done one poultry book, and the person that edited it went, well, this is like reading a bowl of spaghetti. It's all there. But I was like, oh, okay. So, and you can hide that. And I've worked really hard on that. But actually, as you quite rightly say, my non-author opinion versus the individual that's done a couple of hundred. Yeah, it's so there's something here also about within the individual, but within a team or a relationship, partnership, or with an organisation. There's something about the receiving of feedback, which is as important as the giving. And I wonder if your observations go to the other side of the fence, which is, hey, you may have a certain predilection towards negative or positive feedback. But I wonder if there's anything then that talks about the receiving of.
Well, and this is this whole issue of coachability, and there's your willingness to kind of sort of be humble and accept feedback. And you just find that people that are, again, we started off with a statistic that people that are worst at asking and responding to feedback are at the 10th percentile, and those at the best are at the 90th. This is a skill, and I'm doing a workshop this week, and so the question is, and I think it's a pretty good question. In the last 5 years, have you kind of lost ground and you're less effective, or have you gained ground and you're more effective? And my experience in asking people that is everybody's, I'm better than I was 5 years ago. I've gained ground. So here's the damning reality. And this is 70,000 leaders where we measured their overall leadership effectiveness, and we looked at age groups. And if you look at that, what you'd expect is that people with more experience are going to be more effective. But if you look at the data, over 5-year periods, every 5-year period, the effectiveness of leaders goes down. It is absolutely devastating. You become less effective unless, when we looked at people who asked for and acted on feedback, who continue to do that, they're 30 percentile points higher, and their effectiveness tends to incline just a bit. They start off at the 79th percentile, and they go up to the 81st or 82nd percentile. So their effectiveness actually increases. So it is interesting. We believe that we get better every year. We believe we improve our skills. But the data we collected says that on average, people get worse.
and I wonder if that comes. Somebody once said to me, it's actually quite difficult to stay still in fast-moving water.
Yeah.
And had my Obi-Wan Kenobi moment and had a little think about that, and I kind of
great analogy.
And I got it right. I get because and it's it's a boxing champion. It's hard to get up and pound the roads when you become the world champion, and now you wake up and you're in silk sheets. So there's something about you strive to get to the top of that mountain, listening to feedback, being seen to listen to feedback. The reason you can promote me is that I take on feedback. I demonstrate that I'm doing it. But when I get to a certain level, I can kind of inoculate myself. And maybe I get bewitched by my own agenda of now I've got to this pinnacle. All my effort goes into the hamster wheel. And there's a couple of things going on there, but there is something about maybe in leadership development and team effectiveness, which is, how do you really demonstrate to yourself and the rest of the organization that you are actively learning? That's an interesting question that when I ask it, normally there's quite a lot of tumbleweed.
Yeah, there is. And again, this hard thing that we believe our good press. People will tell us you're doing great. I mean, oh my gosh, you're amazing. It's like, I mean, you have to prove it every day, and you have to kind of start over every day. In some ways, that's kind of discouraging, right?
But it's like fitness, though, isn't it? You make it part of your regime, or how you eat. You make it part of. There's this thing, there's a difference between motivation and I don't know where I heard this. It was on some social media clip and it really stopped me. Motivation's not the issue, this person said. It's discipline. Discipline's the issue. Because there are lots of people who are highly motivated to do things, but they never see it through because motivation wanes. But discipline, cultivate discipline. The discipline of insert here. So I think that to me is something that I used to say to about getting motivated. Now I've started to shift to this idea of how disciplined are you?
Yeah. It's always a battle. It's always hard, and it's never going to get easy. And you have to earn it every day.
I like that. I think that's got to be a Zenger Folkman T-shirt. Put it on every day. So listen, just alert to time and the topics and my desperate desire to keep talking to you for at least a week. And you go,
you're very
you go, Guy, I've got things to do. I can't stay here and educate you any further. So listen, you've been a joy. Just before I go, a couple of questions. Number one, if people wanted to just touch base with you, see where you are and what you're about, where would they go, Joe?
So zengerfolkman.com, Zenger Folkman, Folkman.com is our website, and you'll see lots of webinars, articles, different things on there. Also, we publish blogs on Forbes and Harvard Business Review, hbr.org. You can check out those webinars and those blogs, and that's a fun place to kind of check in. And every month we do have a podcast called the 90th Percentile. And you can check that out. It's kind of 15 minutes short every week. And then the final thing is just we have a webinar every month. We'd love to just have you join that. So it's fun.
Well, I think somebody's just turned on a tumble dryer at your end. So it's got noise here at your end for some reason.
I know. My wife's in the bathroom and she turned on water.
Fantastic. So listen, just before you go, one last thing then. A book that you didn't publish, because when people say to me, I can't suggest my own one. If somebody said, Joe, if there's any one thing I should go and read, what would you say? Do you know what? Go and read this. There are many others, but this is the one. What would you say?
So I'm really proud. I published a book recently called The Trifecta of Trust. And I think it's a fun book, and if you thought I called it my Manhattan Project. What I was looking for was the smallest behavior with the largest impact, and I find it's trust, and so that's kind of a fun thing to kind of look at. And I think what we found about trust is if you can increase trust in any relationship or any organization, life's going to be better. So trust.
Perfect. So Joe, you've been an absolute superstar. So thank you from me. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Stay on for a few moments just to make sure everything uploads. But from me and the audience and anybody or everybody that's listening, let me be more positive than that. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's been a delight to be here, and let's talk again.
That's it, so I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.